What drove a man like Torquemada to become one of history's most feared torturers? Was it blind devotion, raw ambition, or something even darker? In this video, we'll uncover the shocking medieval torture methods he employed, illustrated by haunting photos that reveal the dark side of humanity. Can you handle the truth? When most think of the medieval era, they picture knights and castles. But beneath the romance lies harsh cruelty. Torquemada embodied terror, using unimaginable devices to break both body and spirit. This isn't a history lesson. It's a window into the terrifying extremes of human cruelty. By the end, you'll not only know these tortures, but feel the weight of the terror they inspired, and perhaps question how far we've truly come in our progress. Medieval society built its foundations on pain and fear, calling it justice. The church ruled even over kings. Questioning authority wasn't just dangerous, it was a death sentence. But death alone wasn't enough. People had to be broken. Torture was used to reinforce power, not uncover truth. Every cracked bone and anguished cry reminded everyone that obedience wasn't optional. This wasn't justice, it was domination disguised as morality. The devices, techniques, and torment were real and deliberately terrifying. It's hard to fathom a devout monk morphing into the architect of one of history's darkest chapters. For Tomás de Torquemada, he had an obsessive pursuit of purity. He went on a mission that blurred the line between salvation and suffering. Born into a deeply religious family, Torquemada rose to power as Spain grappled with upheaval. There were wars, plagues, and the merging of diverse faiths under Christian rule. But Torquemada saw these differences not as a strength, but as a threat. As Grand Inquisitor, Torquemada led the Spanish Inquisition, and he turned religious conformity into a brutal campaign of fear. Heresy, loosely defined, ensnared anyone from practicing Jews to those questioning doctrine. For Torquemada, saving souls justified any means, no matter how gruesome. Better 100 innocents suffer than one heretic escape was his chilling mantra. Under Torquemada, torture was a very sacred instrument. The rack stretched limbs till they broke. The strappado wrenched shoulders from their sockets. Iron clamps silenced cries of mercy. These weren't just punishments. They were spectacles designed to terrorize communities into submission. Confessions extracted under agony were celebrated as proof of divine justice, even as bodies were broken and minds shattered. The Spanish Inquisition under Torquemada wasn't merely about enforcing religious law, it was about annihilating dissent. Entire families were imprisoned on suspicion alone. Forced conversions, public burnings, and exile swept across Spain like a plague. For Torquemada, this was holy work. He saw it as purification of the nation's soul. But to his victims, it was a nightmare without end. Even today, Torquemada's name is synonymous with cruelty. Was he a fanatic driven by faith, or a man who used terror to get power? Did he just hide it all under the guise of piety? Was he blind, or just plain evil? When I looked through these photos, it got me thinking, what kind of messed up mind cooks up the pain with so much precision? For these medieval torture devices, carefully crafted, does not cut it. They were well calculated to be masterpieces for evil and cruelty. Each twisted invention reflected an era where fear ruled and suffering was power. Right now, we uncover the most shocking torture devices of the medieval age horrors that reveal just how far humanity once went in the name of control. At first glance, the Iron Maiden appears like a simple sarcophagus, but when we take a step closer, its horror becomes clear. The interior was lined with sharp, unforgiving spikes, placed deliberately to pierce but not kill its victim. When closed, the maiden would impale its captive in excruciatingly precise ways. But it'd avoid major organs just to prolong the agony. Some historians debate whether it was used widely or even at all, but its legend has remained sharp. It still stands as a symbol of the brutal ingenuity of that harsh period. The Iron Maiden wasn't just a torture device, it was a weapon of fear. Imagine being forced into its cold embrace, knowing the spikes were designed to pierce you just enough to prolong the agony. Whether it was used widely or not, its very existence symbolized the terrifying precision of medieval cruelty. Can you even imagine being trapped in that thing? Few devices capture the essence of medieval torture, like the rack. Victims were tied at both ends, hands above their heads, feet below, while a crank system pulled their bodies in opposite directions. Slowly and unbearably, the device stretched the human form beyond its limits, tearing ligaments, dislocating joints, and, in the end, breaking bones. The sheer agony was more than enough to drive victims to confess crimes they hadn't committed, anything to make the pain stop. But the rack was about more than inflicting pain. Like the Iron Maiden, it was about psychological domination. The sound of your own body cracking under pressure could destroy even the most vigorous mind. Victims who survived were left permanently crippled. Their limbs would remain twisted as living reminders of the fate they faced. There's no room for deceit. This cannot be disguised as a method of interrogation. It was more of a spectacle of suffering, a public demonstration of power designed to force consent. For a device so deceptively simple, the strappado inflicted unspeakable torment. Victims had their hands bound behind their backs and were suspended by a rope. Once hoisted high into the air, the rope was released, sending the victim plunging downward, only to be stopped with a violent jerk. This sudden halt dislocated shoulders, tore muscles, and inflicted a level of pain that defied description. The more the drops, the more excruciating the agony. More and more damage traveled with each jolt. Pain is carefully duplicated and packed into different bouts. Eventually, the victims were left with shattered joints and badly mutilated nerves. Unlike the rack, which relied on steady tension, the strappado delivered pain in sharp, unpredictable bursts, enough to leave its victims in constant fear of the next drop. This torture device shattered spirits. The Judas cradle is a device so grotesque, it's difficult to imagine its existence. Victims were lowered, naked, onto a pyramid-shaped wooden seat with the sharp point positioned to impale sensitive areas. Gravity did the rest, as the victim's weight forced their body downward over hours or even days. The sheer humiliation was as devastating as the physical pain. It wasn't just torture, it was degrading. The Judas cradle exemplified the sadistic lengths medieval interrogators would go to just to enforce compliance. Victims rarely ever survived the ordeal without severe infection or permanent damage. And those who did? They were left scarred beyond recognition, both physically and mentally. The breaking wheel, also known as the Catherine wheel, turned human suffering into a public spectacle. Victims would be tied to a massive wooden wheel, their limbs splayed and secured. Executioners then used heavy iron rods to shatter their bones one by one. After the rounds of broken bones, the remains of the victim's body were interwoven through the wheel's spokes and left on display many times for days as a warning to others. Sounds like annihilation, doesn't it? The breaking wheel reduced a person to fragments, physically and symbolically. And to non-victims, it was a very pictorial reminder that rebellion or defiance would be met with utter destruction. Even the most miniature instruments of torture carried devastating consequences. Thumb screws were deceptively simple, designed to crush fingers with precision, applying so much pressure to the most delicate joints. It was slow and methodical, and it would leave the victims with long days of suffering, with almost no hope of reprieve. Burning at the stake was another infamous method, where victims endured slow, agonizing deaths as flames consumed their bodies. Public executions like this were staged events meant not only to punish, but to entertain and terrify. The crowds would cheer as a chilling backdrop to the victims' screams, giving the state a fulfilling sense of dominance. Other devices, such as the head crusher, the boot, or the heretic's fork, show how obsessed they were with inflicting pain in the most shocking and horrifying ways. These weren't random acts of violence. They were calculated expressions of control designed to instill fear in entire populations. What ties all these devices together? You're right, it is their intent. Torture in the medieval era wasn't just about punishing individuals. It was about building the society they wanted. A society of people that could not but obey. A society of people living in constant fear, hoping never to experience the unimaginable suffering. They achieved this society by breaking bodies and crushing spirits, rulers, and religious authorities alike. The psychological impact of these devices extended far beyond their victims. Public displays of torture and execution were designed to send one clear message, and it's that dissent would not be tolerated at all. Innocence did not matter. What mattered was that these guys controlled all the power. These devices remind us of the capacity of humanity for cruelty and the scary lengths to which we go in the pursuit of power. But they also force us to confront uncomfortable questions. How far have we really come? Are we really free from the instincts that created these horrors? These are not just relics of history. They reflect the darkest parts of human nature, like a mirror we must face, no matter how disturbing the image, because what you just saw isn't just history. It's a warning. The Inquisition's net was wide. It snared Jews, Muslims, and even devout Christians who were accused of heresy or simply strayed from orthodox teachings. Mainly targeted were the conversos, or Jews who had converted to Christianity, whose faith Torquemada believed was not genuine. In this capacity, the Inquisition employed torture as an operational tool for eliciting confessions of often flimsy and sometimes fabricated evidence. The use of an accusation, even the slightest whisper of dissent, as justification for arrest with virtually no possibility of defending oneself on the part of an accused, was common practice. Let's discuss one of the most shocking tales, that of Leonor de Cisneros. She was a young Spanish woman who was thrown into the maelstrom of the Reformation. This poor woman was arrested for having adopted the Protestant faith. Leonor did temporarily recant because of pressure from the Inquisition, but her spirit couldn't rest. Having watched the execution of her husband, she returned to her faith and would not be silenced. Leonor suffered in prison for 8 years, from conviction rather than compromise. In 1568, she made her final stand, burned at the stake as an unrepentant heretic. Leonor's story is not one of defiance, but of quiet courage, refusing to bend in fear of death. The physical torment brought about by Torquemada's Inquisition was matched only by the psychological trauma endured at its hands. Continuous fear of arrest, the isolation of imprisonment, and anticipation of torture wore down the minds of the accused. Many were forced to confess to crimes they did not commit, believing that death was preferable to prolonged suffering. The methods of the Inquisition were not only designed to punish, but to break the human spirit, making people absolutely conform through deep terror. What Torquemada's reign left behind is still present as a sorrowful reminder of human nature. It is a reminder of how cruel humans can be once ideology takes the front seat over compassion. Stories about his victims remind us to always be vigilant against such abuses of power, and to ensure that the darker annals of history do not repeat themselves. Each of these devices has a story of fear, control, and the chilling lengths to which authority will go to dominate. They remind us that history's darkest moments are not just in the past, but echo into our present. These methods reveal the depths of human cruelty and challenge us to consider, have we truly learned from our past, or do these shadows still shape the world today? Let me leave you with this. We must never forget these moments of darkness, for they serve as warnings of what happens when fear triumphs over mercy and power corrupts. So, what do you think? Which device shocked you the most? How do you think these medieval practices still echo in today's world? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more chilling dives into history's untold truths.